This is a looking glass portrait. It's a holographic display that can show both photos and videos, and today we're going to be making an aesthetic liminal artwork with it. But first, how does it work? Well, if you ever had one of those old lenticular pictures when you were little, you're already familiar with the technology. If you move or it moves, you see something completely different. The only difference here is, instead of maybe having 2 or 3 images, you can have up to 100 different views showing at the same time, viewable from anywhere within a 58-degree angle. So, pull up Pinterest and begin the search. Gathering is one of the most vital steps in the process, as it helps you both construct and visualize ideas. Don't mindlessly scroll like a zombie though. When browsing Pinterest for educational purposes, like the dedicated artist that you are, you're gonna need to be looking for 4 main things: lighting, composition, color, and concept. Take this image for example. Look at that subtle off-white coloring. The tasteful thickness of it. Oh my god. It even has a watermark. I chose this one for the lighting, this one for the composition. Look at that color, and this concept just blew my mind. If you can't find good images and need me to hold your hand, don't worry, I've collated a bunch of liminal space reference pics and linked it below for your ease and comfort. Now for blocking is the bridge between your blank screen and the detailed scene. It's pretty much a 3D equivalent of sketching out your scene before you start painting. Things don't really go well when you start modeling high poly assets bit by bit and setting up composition as you go, which is why we always block things out. So take a look at what you've gathered from Pinterest and draw inspiration from the images to help you set up your scene. Blocking out your scene is probably one of the simplest steps, as all you have to do is create rough and loose primitive shapes as placeholders for your detailed object. This helps flesh out the composition and the camera angle, providing a really solid foundation to later go in and add in the details. A major thing to look out for and keep in mind while blocking is lighting. I'll cover lighting more in the next section, but the shapes you create during the blocking stage dictate how the light is shaped and how it ultimately transforms your scene. Quick note, since we are making this in a holographic format, it really helps to see the full area the hologram will feature. Thankfully, Looking Glass is an add-on for that, which I'll link down below. Just download the add-on, and then in Blender hit Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, Install, and then hit the check mark, followed by Install Dependencies. Now in your side panel, you should be able to preview your hologram by setting the area and hitting this button. This particular scene, I just added a cube for the counter and some cubes for the stools. Then I just positioned the camera and added some cubes for the buildings outside. Quick tip, it can be really useful to have a random human in your scene, so you can scale your items properly. Lighting is weird, because on the surface, it's a pretty simple concept. Add light and things get brighter. But in my opinion, lighting is one of the hardest things to get right. The reason it can be so hard to learn is because there aren't really any rules or proper procedures that you can take to get quote-unquote good lighting. I mean, you can learn from different lighting setups, but to transform your scene, you need lighting intuition. This is why when beginning, I recommend recreating the lighting found in your reference. Try to recreate the way light behaves and reacts in the environment, creating shadows and bouncing in all sorts of weird places. But the cool thing about lighting is, you'll just magically get better at it over time through practice. For my scene, I took inspiration from this artwork by Edward Hopper and tried to recreate the warm interior and teal/green exterior. I added a bright light in the middle of the composition, giving me a nice shadow fall off into the foreground, directing the viewer's eye. Moving on, it's time for the dreaded... I'm not gonna go into the specifics of modeling here because, well, it's its own whole topic. And if you're interested, there are thousands of modeling tutorials on YouTube. But I will say you have 2 options when it comes to modeling. Either modeling things by hand or sourcing them online. Personally, I use a mix of both, as you can have a balance between saving time with pre-made assets while still having the customizability and control with the ones you end up modeling. There are tons of places where you can find both free and paid 3D models, but these are my favorites. Back to our scene, I sourced all the street models online while I hand modeled things like the counter, room, and crown molding. This flexibility was great since I only had a couple of hours to get this whole thing done. Now, this looks pretty good, but where's the color? Nearly all high quality materials these days are something called PBR textures. What this means is that each material has an image texture corresponding to a certain attribute. For example, this is a tile texture, and these are its texture maps. This one is called the albedo. When applied, it gives the material color. Next we have the roughness map, which is pretty self-explanatory. It just dictates which parts are rough and which ones are smooth. Very similar to the roughness map is the specular map, which dictates how reflective something is. This provides finer control of the overall material finish, giving more realistic results. Next is my personal favorite, the normal map, which ironically is the weirdest looking one. This one is a phony. It pretty much fakes bumps and surface detail by telling the render engine how to bounce light off it. Now, these four are the most important textures you need, but in some cases, maps like displacement, Metallica, metalness, it's the shiny one, and alpha come into play. Anyway, now that we know what they do, all you have to do is set them up for each material, tweak them as you like till you get just the right look. If you don't know what to do, just search on YouTube how to set up materials, followed by your 3D software of choice, because again, materials and textures are something you could spend hours and hours on. Back to our scene, I've utilized a bunch of materials to give each item its own unique look. I got these materials from various places online and tweaked them to best suit my scene. And would you look at that, our scene is done. Set your resolution and samples. I usually like to go with 1350 by 1080 and somewhere between 200 and 1000 samples with denoising turned on. But these are very loose numbers, so just experiment and see what looks good for you. Now, how are we ever going to render something as complex as a hologram? Well, it turns out the people at Looking Glass have a bunch of add-ons for different programs. And for Blender, all you have to do is choose your device and the number of views and set an output location. And then you just hit render. What you end up with is this collage of photos taken from all different angles. Now, this file works like any other PNG file, so you can bring it into Photoshop or Lightroom or any software you like and mess with it, which is what we're going to do next. This is the final polish to any artwork. I personally use either Lightroom or DaVinci Resolve to color grade and polish my renders, but honestly, you can use anything. Just bring in your render and adjust things like exposure, contrast, and much more. Or you could use a LUT, which is a pre-made look. For this scene in particular, I ended up using DaVinci Resolve. I just adjusted the exposure, then added halation, chromatic aberration, and some bloom, and then finally I put a LUT on it. And this time we're actually fully done. Now to view your hologram, either upload it to the Blocks website or add it to your Looking Glass display through the Looking Glass Studio app. If you guys are interested in getting yourself a Looking Glass portrait, I've got an affiliate link down below that also gives you $40 off. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll catch you guys later.